So tonight's presentation is basically a collection of thoughts around what we observe through our investments in deep tech, particularly in hardware and a little bit in life sciences, which is less my field, but I get information from my colleagues to share with you. And I think for some of you, the brand of our fund, SOSV, is not that famous, but you might know some of our operations. HAX has been very active as a hardware investor for about 6-7 years, and IndieBio and Rebel Bio are two other accelerators part of our program that deal with life sciences. So the first thing that happens when we put together those reports is that we realize we'll never be done because there's just so much going on. And even when we talk about deep tech, the definitions of deep tech are pretty vague, but essentially it's everything that's not an app and probably involve some atoms, maybe some electronics, maybe some living cells. So I'm going to share through this presentation part of what we are going to publish in the next 2 weeks. You'll get all the slides after, so you're much welcome to take pictures, but you won't get those slides immediately. You will get them very soon. If you want to take pictures, you also can put them on Twitter with the hashtag DeepTechTrends. We'll be very happy when we see some tweets about that. So tonight I'm going to go through those 5 parts. First, to give you a quick overview of what we think is going on, then narrow down into 4 different areas of consumer, health tech, B2B applications, and finally some biotech. So first, a few words about our fund. So SOSV is what we call hands-on deep tech capital. We're a global early-stage deep tech fund. We have about 650 million under management. We're about to close a new fund of 250 million. It's probably going to be oversubscribed by the end of the year. We have invested in over 800 startups, and we invest in about 150 new startups every year. So that's a lot of startups, about a third of which are part of our hardware investments, and a third in biotech, and the third is a mix of food, software, blockchain, and other things. What differentiates us is that we invest at a very early stage when you have just a prototype, a few founders, and we help through our labs and through our support go from the very early prototype all the way to market. So that's how we operate. Those are our brands for different programs around the world. We're pretty global. So I used to be based in China, actually in Asia for over 15 years, so it's a long time doing different things. And then when I joined SOSV, I joined in Shenzhen to be part of the hardware program. So anybody who's been to Shenzhen here? If you work in electronics, well, few people, more than the average crowd. I think Jonathan was speaking just earlier, was telling me that you're flying to Shenzhen when? Tonight, okay. So that's basically when you do electronics or hardware, very often you cross paths with Shenzhen, which is not great these days due to the trade discussions, but like discussions probably the mild word for it. But anyway, so that gives you a few ideas of where we're based. After a long time in China, I'm now in Paris. I take care of a lot of our Europe activities and a bit of the East Coast. It's not fully confirmed and announced yet, but we're going to open a biotech lab in New York. We're very excited about the biotech scene in the East Coast. We think the sector is very underfunded at the early stages, so we think there's really great opportunity, and we actually got support from the city to do that. So a few ideas about the portfolio. Most of our portfolio companies are very young, so they're not that famous because they haven't been unicornized yet, except a few. You probably know Formlabs from Boston, Getaround, BitMEX, a crypto exchange that does derivative crypto products. So it's a little bit obscure, but they're actually doing fantastically well. They literally print millions of dollars in profit every day. Jump Bikes, a company from New York, got acquired by Uber. We're the lead in Series A and actually the largest investor in the company, which made us actually investors in Uber just before the IPO. So that was good. Some companies in our portfolio, couple in cellular agriculture, Memphis Meats doing beef and chicken in a lab. Perfect Day that does dairy without cows, just released a new brand of ice cream. Gelta doing synthetic human collagen, and then a few others in the hardware space, consumer robots and B2B robotics. And the last one is a consumer device that does personalized audio adapting to your hearing. One of the founders is an ear surgeon and used some technologies used to test the hearing of infants to be able to understand our hearing profile and create personal equalizers. And the gentleman over there, if you don't recognize him, is Stevie Wonder. He actually owned 3 pairs of Nura. All right, so let's start with the overview. So the first wave of hardware and IoT companies, pioneered a lot of things, and a number of them also got the arrows. Sometimes pioneers get that. The second generation is turning more toward B2B and B2B2C, mostly because consumers don't necessarily have a lot of disposable income to put hundreds of dollars into products. We also see that the funding for deep tech is broadening, so that's great with VC, CVC, and SoftBank also becoming a very important player in the field. There's a number of now deep tech unicorns that have emerged and multiplying. Here's a list of specialist deep tech VCs around the world, in US, in Europe, other geographies, and some global investors. There's also a number of funds that are not specialized in deep tech, but invest in deep tech companies. And there's super specialists that do only one category, like IoT, medtech, quantum computing. We haven't mentioned Chinese investors, even though they're very active, because they tend to be generalists, but they also invest vast amounts in deep tech. There's also new models emerging to help scientists avoid the kind of the East Coast model, where they would only get like 1 to 3% of a company and not be founders, but just be licensing IP there. Now they want to be founders, and there's more and more support systems to help them make that jump. In US, ICOR is a very famous program that runs through about 100 universities to help validate business models and form a team. There's new types of outfits that help as well. So not all is good in deep tech. These are a few spectacular failures that happened. Probably the most spectacular is the Theranos one, over $1 billion wasted on that one. It's about half of that group. But you also saw a number of robotic companies trying to do consumer robots that didn't do too well. The two in the middle are augmented reality companies, also blew quite a bit of money. Airware is a B2B drone company. Lytro is doing light field photography, but couldn't find a very good commercial application for it. And my personal regret is the Landroid machine that folds your laundry, and that went sadly under and had to fold. So, number of hardware unicorns. For most people, when they think hardware, they think about consumer products, but we see more and more B2B companies, particularly in automotive, emerging. So you can see here how that evolved over the years. What's also quite interesting, so you probably recognize some names, also quite interesting is the number of Chinese companies in that field, particularly in automotive, and there's probably too many of them. Just a few days ago, there were a number of articles about NIO, a company that is labeled the Tesla of China, that was basically is listed on the New York Stock Exchange, I think, and already lost about $5 billion through their operations. So they're really trying to get profitable. And there's probably a consolidation that's going to happen at some point. SoftBank has been an important player. They invested themselves and through the syndicates about $6 billion in those hard tech companies. You can probably recognize some of them. Zoom is the pizza robot. You have Plenty, which is a urban agriculture company, vertical farming, and a number of in automotive as well. On the investment front, China has a bit of a particular situation due to trade tensions and more scrutiny regarding Chinese investments in the US. The amount of investment from China to US has dropped dramatically. And through new policies in China around their participation in local VC funds, the amount of funding has gone down after having caught up with the US amount in 2018. And so that's a kind of recent development, but still very, very active scene. So now let's dive into categories. Here you can see how that evolved for us. We used to do a lot more consumer than today. Now we're really about enterprise, industry, and health. So I'm going to go through some examples in those categories from our portfolio on the outside. So a few ideas about consumer trends. The first wave had mixed results, and today what's really working is in the consumer IoT revolution is connecting everything with voice. The second wave is going in a number of directions, and we'll explore some. and the fact that B2B2C now dominates B2C. In terms of investment volume in consumer, the volume has gone a bit down, like we are below the peak that happened in 2017, but still pretty good volumes. Some products have become really mature. It's almost hard to distinguish them now. You see here the typical trackers. What's interesting is to see new forms of fitness products emerging, which command much higher price. I mentioned two here. One that's going public soon is Peloton. Another one that's doing quite well is Tonal, raised almost 100 millions. And there's a number of other companies also in the connected fitness space, like a Mirror or Hydro, that are also quite interesting. Here you can see whether or not home fitness is going to compete with typical studio fitness. We see some early signs of this competition between Peloton and a number of members of a SoulCycle. 3D printing, that's also something that happened in New York very early on. You can probably see the peak of expectations correlate with the stock price of Stratasys. In terms of consumer 3D printing, we're still very far from printing everything we need at home, and can almost wonder if that will ever happen. However, on the B2B front, 3D printing is really used in a lot of places. One very iconic company is Smile Direct Club that does teledentistry for teeth alignment, now worth about $7 billion on the stock market. A number of other companies doing glasses, helmets, bike helmets, insoles, bike frames, and even a new mascara brush from Chanel. So voice, we mentioned, like how many people have a voice device at home, Alexa or else? Okay, about a quarter. So that's already a significant bump compared to probably a year or two ago. And now all those devices connect with everything that's remotely smart in the house, including cars and headphones. Another category that's done well with two notable acquisitions is around security. So Ring was acquired for Amazon for $1 billion, and August was acquired by Assa Abloy after having raised over $70 million. What's interesting is now there's more and more concerns around privacy, and some companies are actually trying to deal with that efficiently by sometimes removing camera and doing more on-device calculation, more at the edge, so that they won't share too much private data. So Minute is an example of a company we invested in. The founder used to work at Apple and created this camera-free security device that used sound analysis. In terms of robotics, we're still waiting for all those humanoid robots of science fiction. What we have is mostly crawlers. So we have the Roomba and the Roomba family. This is equivalent in China. Interestingly, the Chinese equivalent is worth more on the stock exchange than the Pioneer iRobot. A few others. A few other attempts at home robotics didn't turn out too well. Some of what worked well and seems to keep working well is things related to education. So those two companies are from China, selling products all around the world. The second one, MakeBlock, is one of the very first investments on this, already valued about $400 million. So when you reach that type of stage, you wonder, like, is there a company that could still acquire you? Like, is it Lego? Is it Microsoft? Who could acquire a company like that? So it's very likely that companies like this are actually going to go public rather than be acquired. Maybe some of you caught the new videos from Boston Dynamics that just came out, I think, just a day ago. And they announced they're starting to sell their Spot Mini robot. They haven't announced the price, but I doubt it will be in every home anytime soon. And since we're talking about China and education, this is another example of products used in education using quite high tech with basically brainwave sensing to track the focus of students to see if they're distracted or confused by what they hear. So China is exploring in all sorts of directions things around artificial intelligence, blockchain, cloud computing, data technology. And if there's something to find, they might find about it before the West. So you could say it's probably the world's largest experiment in AI education. Another category of product that got a lot of media attention is virtual reality. So the consumer devices are pretty functional, but they seem to haven't really found yet a killer app. I have an Oculus Go. I mostly use it for Netflix when I use it. But there's a few B2B2C applications. So Blackbox VR is doing a VR-based fitness, and Sandbox VR is a room scale entertainment, including motion capture. Again, here there's a lot of application B2B, from real estate applications to training. So I actually tried this application of a knee surgery training, and it's very good. It's in VR because the result wasn't great for a poor patient. I'm not sure would have survived the operation. There's also high resolution VR for other types of training with much more immersive type of displays, and even virtual reality therapy, like this is to treat your arachnophobia. They're going to release the spiders right after. AR facing the same situation. The devices are pretty expensive. The two most famous ones is HoloLens and Magic Leap. Magic Leap raised a lot of money, but they really haven't yet. They're not really accessible for consumers yet. There's a couple of other attempts. Google Glass is coming back with an enterprise edition, and then North, another company, is releasing a much more simple type of display in the form of glasses. Holograms might be the next frontier, so 3D volumetric displays. Some of them can be used in outdoor or commercial environments with just like a spinning light was synchronized to display an image. But there's also desktop application. This is a company we invested in called Looking Glass, also have an office in New York. And that allows professionals like designers, game designers, architects to display 3D objects on their desktop. Another interesting emerging model is around how you sell those devices or experiences. Sometimes it's just too expensive for people to buy. So there's new rental models that emerged and new financing models. You can actually get a Peloton with no down payment on the 0% APR financing. So just on top of a subscription, you can actually get it at home like right tomorrow. So you don't have to pay right away the $2,000 it costs. Around other innovations, again, facing consumers is more and more robots in different forms of retail, particularly food production. Zoom has put robots in trucks so that they can cook pizzas on the go. Cafe X is making coffees with robot arms to actually do more artisan coffee. Spice is a chain of restaurants using robot cooks. And in our portfolio, we also invested in a number of smart robots and vending machines. One interesting one is for business travelers, for example, is a Presso that can do dry cleaning in a box, and that's for hotels, airports, and you can basically get your garment dry clean in just a few minutes. In terms of retail, there's also this emergence of micro retail, unmanned micro retail. And China is at the forefront of it. Bingo Box has raised close to $100 million for a chain of automated convenience stores. Super Monkey has created gyms in containers, micro gyms. You have mini karaoke cabins and also nail art stations. Mobility, obviously a big theme, both for micro mobility and vehicles, like cars. There's been a tremendous amount of investment, about $120 billion deployed since 2018. No, I think it's 2011. Sorry, it's a typo. Around technology, technologies involved are sensors, battery, and hardware is really the key for competitive advantages and also the deployment of suitable infrastructures around those services. So when you move from a basically driver-based UberX to autonomous vehicle, then operation maintenance and the cost of hardware and the longevity of hardware becomes really critical. So it also has some growing pains. You see here the bike graveyards or the position from citizens. You see some quality issues and the challenge of charging all those electric vehicles. And new types of infrastructures are necessary actually to face those problems. So a couple of investments we made in the space, a company called PushMe that provides a battery attachment for e-scooters so that basically you don't need to pick up the scooter and charge it at home or in other premise. You can just replace the battery in charging networks of stations that are placed in different shops in different locations. Inspection for vehicles, also something that could be automated. And this company we invested in China called UiBot can automate the inspection of wheels, for instance, for large commercial vehicles. So that was for consumer. Now let's talk a bit about health. So health has also a lot of things happening, gets a bit less media coverage, but it's really, really interesting because there's a lot of niche conditions that actually affect millions of people and have very high value as if you can solve those problems. So you have devices that focus on diagnostics, but you also have devices that provide full therapies and can actually treat a number of conditions. And those digital therapeutics directly compete with pharma. There's also new advancements in regulations where you have new remote monitoring reimbursement regulation that allows you to basically invoice for, a doctor can invoice for remote monitoring of patients. So that helps them to monitor instead of 100, maybe 1,000 patients, and those patients don't have to come back and forth to a hospital to do that. But the key behind a lot of the health issues remain behavior changes, and there's still a lot to do on that front. So a few numbers, you can see that health tech investment is actually growing very nicely. There's a few categories that are also doing very well within health is surgical robots and biotech. And the idea of all those companies is to provide better access or better cost and better outcomes, and ideally a combination of the three. Some companies in our portfolio, I'm going to go quickly, but those are just like for different types of diagnostic. The first two do blood diagnostic for different applications. The CREAM, for instance, is used in emergency situations where you need to know the blood, like there's a car accident. If somebody loses a lot of blood and need a blood supply, generally you would go for the universal donor pool, and because you can't test on the spot because you just don't have the facility. Now you can do it in 3 minutes, and now you can use more suitable and more common supply than universal donor or have to go to hospital. Another issue with health is around surgery, to have more efficient surgeries and also to have better follow-up, better outcomes following surgeries. The nightmare of surgeons is to see the patient come back a few days after or a few weeks after to actually fix a new problem or the same problem. And it's also a really costly problem for insurers and for hospitals. So those companies help with that. To look at a familiar problem, maybe some of you had a sleep tracker or using Apple Watch or other tracker to track your sleep. And the big problem of sleep trackers is that they don't really help you improve your sleep. They give you some information about it, but when you're asleep, there's just so much you can do. But now, beyond tracking and beyond more precise tracking, you see companies that help you fall asleep or have higher quality sleep or solve problems that are sleep related. So the two companies at the bottom do temperature control and movement analysis to help you fall asleep by cooling your head or your body and helping you wake up by warming you up. And the two on the right, one is helping with bruxism, which is teeth grinding. It's a condition very difficult to treat because it's largely unconscious, and snoring, which is also very difficult to control. So those two are also part of our portfolio. Giving a few more examples of digital therapeutics, I'll talk briefly about this company, Food Marble. They do analysis of the breath after about 20-30 minutes after you ate something. And based on the chemical components in your breath, they can then analyze whether or not the digestion is doing well. So that can help you identify food intolerances gradually through the analysis of your breath. That can help solve a lot of problems with digestion. The one on the right, called Sana Health, looks like a sleep mask, but sleep is kind of a side effect. What it does is actually helps people deal with chronic pain, either physical pain or mental pain, by using combination of light and sound to put your mind in a kind of hypnotic state that helps you fall asleep. This was created by a founder that had a terrible road accident and had a very severe spine injury, ended up in a wheelchair with chronic nerve damage and chronic pain. And the doctors told him he had a 5 years life expectancy because of lack of sleep. So one day he was watching a movie and he realized that he didn't feel his pain. And he wondered what happened, and he realized that probably it was because his mind was so engaged with what was happening, the light and the sound. It wasn't even apparently a very good movie, but he started to study how you could trigger this mental state, and he developed a technology that could do it, used it on himself, and that helped him go way beyond the 5 years he was given. And he needed less and less of those sessions with his prototype to actually go through that. And when some critical components like heart rate variability monitors became affordable, then he decided to create a product that more people could afford. So yeah, one of the challenges of all those great innovations on products and on therapies is that actually it all starts with behavior change. And I think this is something that we haven't quite cracked yet in terms of how to do it, because even if we know what to do, we don't always do it. Because we don't necessarily get the feedback at the right time, and we don't get the feedback loop that would help our neuroplasticity adapt and really keep building that habit. So what's interesting is that there's also a few device companies that look into mental health, and I'll give a few examples here of our portfolio again. One deals with a condition that's not, very well known, is called body-focused repetitive behaviors. So it's everything around nail biting, hair pulling, skin scratching that can have terrible both health but also social impact on the sufferers. And through pretty simple hardware technology but advanced algorithms to recognize the gestures precisely, they can alert people of those unconscious behaviors so that gradually they become more aware of what to do. They've had a number of customers that, after decades of suffering from those conditions, stopped within 2 weeks. A few others that are very interesting, and I'll just talk about one called Flow Neuroscience, which is a depression treatment device that uses brain stimulation. And this just got FDA approved, received investment from Khosla Ventures. So this is really, it's not a wearable as in like a smartwatch. This is a competitor to antidepressants. This is what it is. Taking a look at time. Then I'm going to go into enterprise and industry trends, talk about transportation. So it's pretty obvious that transportation has been revolutionized with all the innovation in the space, logistics and retail. But today, more innovation is also happening in agriculture, manufacturing, construction, and mining. And those are sectors that are affected not by, the problem is not whether or not they're going to keep jobs. The problem is that they can't find the labor to fill those jobs in many cases. And finally, that China is also a big participant in all those innovations. One big player and big innovator is Amazon. So they acquired Kiva a few years ago and have now scaled to over 200,000 robots in their warehouses. Recently, they acquired another company called Canvas, doing autonomous carts. They partner with a company called Balio to do autonomous forklifts. They also do the drone delivery, last mile delivery. They're running pilots. If you came across the blimp mothership for drones, this is actually not real, but maybe it will become real at some point. Due to Amazon's very aggressive automation, a lot of competitors have to adapt to be able to offer the same level of service. If you have to compete with Amazon Prime, you need people expect like same day or next day delivery. Then you need better solutions. One illustration of that is Shopify, an e-commerce company, acquired basically a warehouse logistic company called Six River Systems recently for close to $500 million. And a few other examples that offer more flexible solutions for retailers. Let's look into a little bit less celebrated sectors that have tremendous opportunities for innovators. Construction is a giant market of trillions of dollars, and you can see there's already a number of companies targeting many aspects of it. But even if you look at the sub-segment of construction robotics, you can even break it down into excavation, foundation, bricklaying, framing, drywall, 3D printing. So there's really a lot to do there. And those are also enormous markets, because with construction is not just building something, it's also considering building as a service, from design and construction, utilities management, maintenance, restoration, demolition. So some funds have been created to deal with just that sector. Brick and Mortar Ventures just announced close to $100 million to invest in the built world. This is a company from the Nordics called Cobot that is building giant concrete structures. So it's like a giant 3D printer. And they want to make buildings on demand. Some companies are also trying to augment the capacities of workers, either to make them more efficient in the warehouse with a wearable barcode scanner that connects with all the inventory, or that give them kind of superpowers. So those two are companies in our portfolio. Nuada is basically a glove that can give you superhuman grip. You can lock your grip into position so that you don't need any effort from your hand on your fingers to hold tools or heavy things. So you only need your arm strength. Another company that started as a medical device realized they had opportunities in industry to reduce the onset of back pain. And it's a soft exoskeleton that decompresses the spine and that avoids work-related fatigue and injuries. A few other companies from a portfolio, we're pretty excited about construction, so we're doing a lot these days in that sector. If you're familiar with concrete walls, you probably know there's generally a metal structure inside, and that's called the rebars. And you need to build it, you need to actually assemble and weld all those bars. And this company called Rebar Tech can do automated rebar cage prefabrication that saves a lot of time for construction. Once you have a building with kind of empty concrete shells, you need to build everything that's inside. And one step of that process that takes a lot of time is the marking of what you need to build. So this company called Mecasys does floor plan projection that allows to save a lot of time doing that. We got a bit obsessed with cleaning. Those are 4 companies we invested in. The first one was AvidBots, a company doing commercial floor cleaning for airports, schools, hospitals. They're based in Canada, and they now have over 100 staff, so it's pretty large for a robotics company. And they clean a lot of airports already. High-rise windows, another company called Plecobot we invested in, cleans faster and cheaper than the Spider-Man that generally do the job. Viabot for pavement, and Somatic actually released a video recently that went a little bit viral, where you see the robot go around and clean the toilets like a series of toilets. What's interesting is that the robot has to be trained by a human in VR. So the human explains to the robot how to do it, and then the robot learns and can do it itself. There's even more sectors that are interesting. So this is probably the kind of the dirtiest operation you can imagine, is landfill operations. And the problem of landfills is they have a problem of birds. There's a lot of birds on landfills, and that creates a lot of health hazards. And the problem with birds is that they get used to almost anything you throw at them. That's typical bird on the scarecrow type of picture. So they have a machine learning algorithm to see what birds are getting used to so that they can change it and come up with new strategies using lasers and sounds to keep them away. So to talk about more traditional industry, you're familiar with the robot arms in factories. So there's about 2.5 million of those deployed around the world. And it's growing actually quite fast. Just last year, about 400,000 new arms were sold. A third of those went to China. And a number of others went to Asia, Japan, and Korea. It's a very large number. China is also making more and more sophisticated robots for their own market. And even despite those numbers, China still has very low robot density compared to more developed markets. So this is going to continue for a long time. In factories, there's more and more demand for flexible solutions. And part of that is the ability to have robots that are smarter because they understand the environment and can work alongside humans. So 2 companies we invested in. One called UiBot has all those sorts of flexible solutions for warehouses and industry environments. Elephant Robotics is a more classic collaborative robot with computer vision. And a company from Boston that's a really interesting one called VO Robotics allows you to use your existing robot arms and equipping the workspace with sensors so that you can actually turn that robot into a smart robot without having to purchase a new arm. Another challenge of factories is to target zero downtime. Downtime can cost upward of $100,000 an hour, and zero waste for productivity reasons and profitability. Two companies we invested in equip machines with sensors. One can detect very early on in the garment industry the defaults in fabric, so that it doesn't have to go all the way to the store to be detected. And another approach to the zero waste is to do custom manufacturing. So Unspun is creating 3D woven custom fit jeans based on your measurements that are scanned in 3D. So it's the perfect fit. And I think we're gradually evolving along those steps of the machine epiphany from reactive to preventive, predictive, and then optimize health and performance. Quick word about drones. So consumer drones are, still a market, but actually largely dominated by DJI from China. But what's interesting is the many applications in B2B, from surveying, defense, agriculture, or deliveries. So Zipline is a company that's very interesting, doing high-value deliveries. They raise over $200 million, and they're very, very active in Africa for medical or AgTech-related delivery. They have a kind of funky system where the launch is through some kind of giant slingshot, and then they catch the drone with a net at the end. But it's working very well for them. More about AgTech. This is just a small part of a bigger map of the AgTech landscape put together by Better Food Ventures. You can find online. You can see soil sensors and automation for irrigation, weeding, harvesting, and a lot of other applications. To give you examples, recently Blue River Technology that makes this attachment to tractors using AI to detect weeds and kill them was acquired by John Deere for about $300 million. And we just invested in a company that's kind of a new 2.0 version of that does it with an autonomous robot. And those are two other investments we made in AgTech. But there's more than sensors and robots. There's also Internet of Bees, cows, sheep, and more. Three companies in those two in the portfolio. This one based in India helps with dairy farm optimization, and you can see applications for beehive maintenance and elimination of parasites. The big players are also active in AgTech. Cargill is doing this experiment, teaming up with, I think, an Irish startup for using facial recognition of cows to track their behavior, their eating patterns, and overall health. And of course, if it's done in America, well, it's also done in China. Here, because China is breeding about half the world's billion pigs, and they use facial recognition for pigs. And what's really interesting in China is that some really big tech players are now operating pig farms. NetEase, Alibaba, JD.com are all developing those technologies as well. And the challenges in those environments is the fact that animals have a lot of siblings. Their face changes very fast because they go from baby to adult in a very short time. They're rarely facing the camera. And the environment is not really conducive to taking like professional pictures. This is an application with Goose. The Goose has also difficult for facial recognition because they have a small face and the eyes are on the side. Just to share a few ideas about synthetic biology and what's going on there. So everything that's happening in hardware is pretty understandable. When you see health tech, you can see like exciting stuff and new sensors, and it's very promising. But when you look at what's going on in synthetic biology, it's some of that stuff is really out there. So I'll share a few examples about what's happening there. So first, you're probably familiar with Moore's law. This is the cost of DNA sequencing compared to Moore's law. You can see what changed there that enabled like vastly new possibilities in that space. Among the tools on the shelves now, you have all those libraries of antibodies, proteins, a lot of known genes, and the fact that you can automate a lot of the work or outsource a lot of the work in biology. So to give examples about tools, Ginkgo Bioworks helps you create custom organisms, and OpenTrons, a New York-based company we invested in, helps with lab automation for automating a lot of the pipetting. So now you can have a small robot on the desktop that can do the work of a lab tech for just a machine that less than 10K. There's a lot of applications in things like biomaterials, going from leather based on mushroom cultures to synthetic human collagen for cosmetics. But the biggest challenge, and probably the most talked about, is everything around food. The fact that animals have a very important land use per gram of protein. And now we're looking at not only vegan or vegetarian alternatives, but also lab-based alternatives. So this is a map of food tech, plant-based, fermentation-based, and cell agriculture. On some examples, you're obviously all familiar with Beyond Meat and Impossible Foods. Notco is a plant-based mayonnaise that company in our portfolio doing very well, and a few others for animal feed, also very interesting. And we're very early movers in the cellular agriculture space, so those companies are all in our portfolio. Probably the most famous is Memphis Meats, does beef and chicken. New Age Meats does pork sausages. Perfect Day raised about over $60 million, does dairy without cows and release ice creams. Clara Food does egg white, this nice meringue. New Cultures does cheese, which makes me as a French a bit uncomfortable, but it's still promising. And Endless West is a company making molecular whiskey, assembling the components of what makes a great whiskey in the lab. And more promising domains that some of them are well on their way and some others are a little bit more far away. From live cell therapies, the ability to target precise cells, the ability to detect diseases before symptoms appear, the growth of organoids used in research and soon to be used as implants, and everything, of course, related to longevity, making us healthy until we die or making us live a lot longer. Technologies to help reduce chronic inflammation, cell senescence, and improve things around metabolism and mitochondria functioning. So this is, I think, all I have. So thank you very much. All those slides will be online. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That was absolutely fantastic and very comprehensive. So thank you for presenting. We'll do one quick question, and if you have other questions, you can tweet.
I have to apologize because I will have to head to the airport very quickly after this. I'm flying back to Europe for another event. But I'm happy to take questions now or by email on the
one quick question,
Twitter, anything.
Thanks for the talk. So all the products that you showed here, are they your portfolio products?
Probably about half.
Half. Okay. I was just curious about the education one you showed in China, because that was featured in Wall Street Journal.
Which one you said?
Education. They're putting the headbands.
The headband? No, that's not one of our companies.
Okay, thanks.
All right, one more super quick question. Yes.
You mentioned that some of the technology or industries are growing really fast, but hard to find talent. Why is that?
Talent. Well, it depends on the type of field you're working in. So I think platforms like this one is great to find talent, but it looks like there's no lack of technical talent to come up with ideas on new research. The problem is more about how you build a company around it, around having a viable business model, the ability to find the right message, the right distribution channels. So the talent is very broad. It's not just technical talent that's missing. It's everything around that. And I think geographies like Europe or Japan, to some extent, have a hard time finding people able to scale companies on a global scale. All right, so I think I'm going to wrap up. Thank you very much.